The morning sun cast a gentle glow through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood quietly in her private sitting room. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the official letter that had arrived just hours before. The words seemed to blur together as tears welled up in her eyes. After months of speculation and whispered conversations, the news was finally official. Her beloved grandmother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth II, had made the difficult decision to step back from her most cherished patronage, the Royal Foundation, for children's welfare. At 97 years old, the Queen had dedicated over 7 decades of her life to this particular cause, personally visiting countless children's hospitals, orphanages, and care facilities across the Commonwealth. It wasn't just a duty for her. It was her passion, her way of giving back to the most vulnerable members of society. The foundation had been her idea, her creation, and her legacy. Now, after careful consideration and discussions with her doctors, she was ready to pass this responsibility to someone she trusted completely. Catherine had always admired the Queen's unwavering commitment to children's welfare. From their very first meeting years ago when she was still dating Prince William, the Queen had seen something special in Catherine's genuine care for others. Unlike many who entered the royal family through marriage, Catherine had never seemed overwhelmed by the responsibilities or focused on the glamour. Instead, she had consistently shown a natural ability to connect with people, especially children, in the most authentic way. The letter explained that the Queen had specifically chosen Catherine to take over the patronage, not just because of her position as the future Queen consort, but because of her proven dedication to children's causes. Over the past decade, Catherine had quietly visited numerous facilities, spent countless hours learning about child psychology, and had even completed specialized training in early childhood development. She had done all of this without seeking publicity or recognition, something that had deeply impressed the elderly monarch. As Catherine read the letter for the 3rd time, memories flooded back of all the moments she had shared with the Queen during their visits to children's facilities. She remembered how the Queen's face would light up when a shy child would finally smile, how she would patiently listen to teenage patients share their dreams and fears, and how she never seemed tired, no matter how long the day had been. The Queen had once told her, "Catherine, these children teach us more about courage and joy than we could ever teach them. They are our greatest teachers." William found his wife sitting by the window, the letter still in her hands. He could see the weight of emotion on her shoulders, the honor of being chosen, mixed with the sadness of knowing this transition marked another step in his grandmother's gradual withdrawal from public life. Without saying a word, he sat beside her and gently took her hand. They had been married for over a decade now, and he could read her emotions better than anyone. "She wants to personally hand over the patronage to me," Catherine finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Next month at the Children's Hospital in London, where she made her very first official visit as Queen. She says it would be the perfect place for a new beginning." The significance wasn't lost on either of them. The Royal London Children's Hospital held special meaning for the Queen. It was where she had first truly understood her calling to help vulnerable children. William squeezed her hand gently, understanding the magnitude of what this meant for his wife. Taking over from his grandmother wasn't just about accepting a new role. It was about carrying forward a legacy that had touched millions of lives. He had watched Catherine grow into her royal duties with grace and authenticity, never trying to copy others but instead bringing her own unique approach to everything she did. He knew she was the right choice, but he also knew how much pressure she was putting on herself to live up to the Queen's incredible example. "She chose you for a reason," William said softly, turning to face his wife. "Granny doesn't make decisions like this lightly. She's watched you for years, seen how you interact with children, how you remember their names and their stories long after you've left. She sees what I see, someone who genuinely cares, not because it's expected, but because it's who you are." Catherine nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. She thought about all the children she had met over the years. Little Emma, who had been battling cancer, but still insisted on showing Catherine her artwork. Teenage Marcus, who had been in foster care, and had written her a letter about his dreams of becoming a teacher, and tiny Sophie, who had been born prematurely but had grabbed Catherine's finger with surprising strength during a hospital visit. Each face, each story, each moment had shaped her understanding of what this work truly meant. The phone rang, interrupting their quiet moment. It was the Queen's private secretary, confirming the details for the handover ceremony. As Catherine listened to the arrangements being made, she felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness building in her chest. This wouldn't be a typical royal engagement with scripted speeches and formal protocols. The Queen had specifically requested something more personal, more meaningful, a private ceremony with just a few close family members and some of the children and families who had been touched by the Foundation's work over the years. That evening, as Catherine tucked their own children into bed, Prince George asked her why she seemed different. With the honesty that only children possess, he had noticed the change in his mother's demeanor. Catherine sat on the edge of his bed and explained, in simple terms appropriate for his age, that Great Granny had asked her to take care of something very important, helping other children who needed extra support and care. "Will you still have time for us?" Princess Charlotte asked sleepily from her own bed across the room. The innocent question touched Catherine's heart deeply. Balancing royal duties with motherhood had always been her greatest challenge, and now she was taking on an even more significant responsibility. But as she looked at her children's trusting faces, she knew that her own experience as a mother would only make her more effective in this new role. "Of course, my darlings," she whispered, kissing each of their foreheads. "In fact, helping other children will make me an even better mummy to you. Great Granny taught me that when we help others, we help ourselves too." As she turned off their bedroom lights and headed downstairs, Catherine felt a sense of clarity beginning to emerge from the emotional whirlwind of the day. This was more than just an honor. It was a calling, and she was ready to answer it. The weeks leading up to the handover ceremony passed in a whirlwind of preparation and reflection. Catherine threw herself into learning everything she could about the Foundation's history, visiting the archives at Buckingham Palace where decades of photographs, letters, and reports documented the Queen's incredible journey with the organization. Each file told a story of lives changed, families supported, and hope restored in the darkest of circumstances. What struck Catherine most deeply were the personal letters the Queen had received over the years from children and families. Handwritten. Notes from parents thanking her for funding life-saving treatments. Artwork from young patients showing their favorite memories of royal visits, and graduation photos from former foster children who had grown up to become doctors, teachers, and social workers themselves. These weren't just statistics or charity work. They represented real people whose lives had been fundamentally transformed by the Queen's dedication. One letter particularly moved Catherine to tears. It was from a young man named David, now 35 years old, who had been in the Foundation's care as a severely ill infant. The doctors had given him little chance of survival, but the specialized treatment funded by the Queen's Foundation had saved his life. In his letter, David shared photographs of his own children and wrote, "Your Majesty, because you cared about one sick baby 40 years ago, my children now have their father. My family exists because of your kindness." Catherine shared this letter with William that evening as they walked through the gardens of their Norfolk home. The weight of what she was about to inherit felt more real with each passing day. This wasn't just about attending events and giving speeches. It was about making decisions that would directly impact vulnerable children's futures. The Foundation managed substantial funds, supported numerous programs, and influenced policy decisions that affected thousands of young lives across the country. "I keep thinking about what the Queen told me last year," Catherine confided as they paused by the old oak tree where their children loved to play. She said that the hardest part of her role wasn't the public appearances or the formal duties. It was making the difficult choices about which programs to fund when there were so many deserving causes. She said every decision felt like choosing between saving one child or another. William understood his wife's anxiety. He had grown up watching his grandmother carry the weight of these responsibilities with grace, but he also knew the private moments when she struggled with impossible choices. The Foundation received hundreds of applications for assistance every month, from families seeking funding for experimental treatments to communities requesting new facilities. The Queen had developed a careful system over the decades, relying on medical experts, social workers, and child psychologists to help guide her decisions, but ultimately, the final choice was always hers. As the day of the ceremony approached, unexpected challenges arose. A prominent tabloid newspaper had somehow learned about the private handover and was pressuring the palace for exclusive coverage rights. The Queen, however, remained firm in her decision to keep the event intimate and meaningful rather than turning it into a media spectacle. This decision sparked debates within the palace communications team about maintaining positive press relations, but Catherine fully supported the Queen's wishes. "This isn't about publicity," Catherine told the palace press secretary during one particularly tense meeting. "This is about honoring the dignity of the children and families who will be there. Some of these families have been through unimaginable difficulties, and the last thing they need is dozens of photographers and reporters treating their stories as entertainment." Her passionate defense of the family's privacy impressed the palace staff and showed them the depth of her commitment to her new role. Meanwhile, the Queen was making her own preparations for what she knew would be one of her most emotional public appearances in years. At 97, she had officially stepped back from most of her patronages, but this one had always been different. Her personal secretary found her one afternoon in her private study, carefully reviewing a speech she had been writing and rewriting for weeks. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "perhaps we could arrange for someone else to read the speech if it becomes too difficult." The Queen looked up with the same determined expression that had carried her through 7 decades of public service. "Thank you, but no," she replied firmly. "Catherine deserves to hear these words from me personally. This foundation has been my life's work, and passing it to her properly is one of the most important things I'll ever do." The Queen's speech was deeply personal, filled with memories of specific children she had met over the years and detailed instructions for Catherine about the foundation's most important programs. She wrote about little Sarah, who had been born with a rare heart condition and had received life-saving surgery through the foundation's emergency fund, and who now worked as a pediatric nurse herself. She mentioned the scholarship program that had sent dozens of foster children to university, many of whom had returned to work in child services, creating a beautiful cycle of care and support. 3 days before the ceremony, Catherine received an unexpected visit from Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter, who had worked closely with various children's charities throughout her own royal career. Anne had a reputation for being direct and practical, with little patience for sentiment, but her advice to Catherine was both wise and surprisingly emotional. "The hardest part," Anne explained as they sat in Catherine's private office, "won't be the public appearances or even the difficult funding decisions. It will be the moments when you can't save someone, when despite all your efforts and resources you lose a child. Mother has carried that pain for 70 years, and it never gets easier. But she's also been present for miracles, for breakthroughs, for moments of pure joy that make all the heartbreak worthwhile." Anne shared her own memories of accompanying the Queen on visits when she was younger, watching her mother's face light up when children would show her their latest achievements, or when former patients would return as adults to show their own children to the woman who had helped save their lives. "She never took credit," Anne continued, "but she remembered every name, every story. That's what made her special, and from what I've seen, that's what will make you special too." The conversation with Anne gave Catherine a new perspective on the emotional demands of her upcoming role. She began to understand that the Queen's choice wasn't just based on her public persona or her position in the family. It was based on her capacity for genuine empathy and her ability to carry both joy and sorrow with equal grace. The night before the ceremony, Catherine found herself unable to sleep. She walked through the quiet halls of Kensington Palace, thinking about all the children whose lives would now be partially in her hands. The responsibility felt overwhelming. But as she paused before a photograph of the Queen with a group of young cancer patients from the 1980s, she felt a sense of purpose settling over her. Tomorrow would mark not just the end of an era, but the beginning of her most meaningful work as a member of the royal family. The morning of the handover ceremony dawned gray and misty, typical London weather that seemed to mirror the bittersweet emotions surrounding the day. Catherine woke before her alarm, her mind immediately focused on the significance of what lay ahead. She had chosen to wear a deep blue dress, the same shade the Queen had worn to the Foundation's inaugural event 70 years earlier. It was a subtle tribute that the Queen herself had suggested during one of their planning conversations. As Catherine prepared for the day, she reflected on her final conversation with the Queen the evening before. They had met privately in the Queen's sitting room at Windsor Castle, just the two of them, without any staff or family members present. The Queen had seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than Catherine had ever seen her, but her mind remained sharp and her dedication unwavering. "Catherine, my dear," the Queen had said, pouring tea from her favorite china set, "I want you to understand something important. This foundation isn't just about the money we raise or the programs we fund. It's about being a voice for children who cannot speak for themselves, being present in their darkest hours and celebrating their victories as if they were your own grandchildren." The Queen had then shared something deeply personal, the story behind why children's welfare had become her life's passion. As a young princess during World War II, she had witnessed firsthand the trauma experienced by children who had been evacuated from London during the Blitz. She had seen their fear, their confusion, and their resilience, and it had shaped her understanding of childhood vulnerability in ways that no amount of royal training could have prepared her for. "I made a promise to myself then," the Queen had continued, her voice growing softer, "that if I ever had the power to protect children, I would use it without hesitation. This foundation has been how I kept that promise. Now I'm asking you to keep it for me." Now, as Catherine's car approached the Royal London Children's Hospital, she could see the small crowd that had gathered despite the palace's efforts to keep the ceremony private. Word had somehow spread, and families who had been helped by the foundation over the years had come to witness this historic moment. There were no barriers or formal security lines, just people standing quietly, many holding photographs or handwritten signs expressing their gratitude to the Queen. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was both solemn and celebratory. The ceremony was being held in the hospital's new wing, which had been built with funding from the foundation 5 years earlier. The room was filled with carefully chosen guests, not dignitaries or politicians, but the real beneficiaries of the Queen's 7 decades of work. Former patients, now adults with families of their own, sat alongside current patients and their families, medical staff who had worked with the foundation, and social workers who had seen its impact firsthand. 8-year-old Lily, who was currently receiving treatment for leukemia, had been chosen to present a bouquet to the Queen. Her mother had been nervous about Lily's participation, worried that the occasion might be too overwhelming for her daughter, but Lily had insisted. "The Queen Lady helped me get better medicine," she had told her mother with the matter-of-fact wisdom that seriously ill children often possess. "I want to say thank you." When the Queen arrived, there was a moment of absolute silence in the room. She moved slowly but determinedly, her familiar handbag on her arm, her expression serene but emotional. Catherine watched from her position, near the small stage that had been set up for the ceremony, marveling at how the Queen's presence could still command such respect and affection, even in her advanced age. Dr. Margaret Sullivan, the hospital's chief pediatrician who had worked with the foundation for over 20 years, served as the ceremony's host. She began by reading testimonials from families across the Commonwealth who had been touched by the Queen's work. Each story was brief but powerful. The premature twins in Scotland whose specialized care had been funded by the foundation, the Aboriginal children in Australia who had received educational scholarships, the young refugees in Canada who had found safety in foundation-supported facilities. As Dr. Sullivan spoke, Catherine noticed the Queen's reaction to each story. Despite having heard thousands of similar accounts over the years, the elderly monarch's eyes still filled with tears at certain moments, and she still smiled with genuine joy when hearing about children's recoveries and achievements. Her emotional investment in these stories remained as strong as ever, which made the handover even more poignant. When it came time for the formal transfer of patronage, the Queen rose slowly from her chair. The room fell completely silent, with even the youngest children seeming to understand the gravity of the moment. Instead of reading from prepared remarks, the Queen spoke from her heart, her voice carrying clearly despite its frailness. 70 years ago I made a promise to the children of this nation and the Commonwealth, she began, her gaze moving across the faces in the room. I promised that their welfare would always be a priority, that their voices would be heard, and that their futures would be protected. Today I am not breaking that promise, I'm ensuring it continues with someone who shares that same commitment. The Queen then turned to Catherine, who had stood and moved to join her at the front of the room. Catherine, you have shown me, through your actions rather than your words, that you understand what this work truly means. You have visited our facilities not for photographs or publicity, but because you genuinely care about the children you meet. You have learned their names, remembered their stories, and followed up on their progress long after the cameras stopped rolling. Catherine felt tears building in her eyes as the Queen continued. This foundation has been my greatest joy, and my most sacred responsibility. I am passing it to you not just because of your position in our family, but because you have proven yourself worthy of the trust these children and their families place in us. The formal documents were then signed, officially transferring the patronage from the Queen to Catherine. But the most emotional moment came when young Lily approached with her bouquet. Instead of simply presenting the flowers and stepping back, as had been planned, Lily impulsively reached up and hugged the Queen's waist. The Queen, clearly moved, bent down as much as her age would allow and whispered something in Lily's ear that made the little girl giggle. What did she say? Catherine asked Lily quietly as the ceremony continued around them. Lily looked up with bright eyes and whispered back. She said that now the pretty princess lady will take care of me too, and that she'll make sure to tell you that I love purple flowers and strawberry ice cream. It was such a perfectly queen-like response, thoughtful, personal, and ensuring continuity of care even in the smallest details. As the ceremony concluded with a reception where guests could speak informally with both the Queen and Catherine, it became clear that this transition represented something much deeper than a simple change of patronage. It symbolized the passing of a torch that had burned brightly for 7 decades, now being entrusted to hands that had already proven their capability and compassion. The most telling moment came when the Queen and Catherine stood together, watching Lily play with some of the other young patients who had attended the ceremony. She won't remember this day specifically, the Queen observed, watching Lily laugh as she chased soap bubbles that a nurse was blowing. But she'll remember that someone cared enough to make sure she got better. That's what this is really about. Not the ceremonies or the recognition, but the quiet certainty that someone is watching over these children with love. As the reception continued, Catherine found herself in countless meaningful conversations with people whose lives had been touched by the Queen's work. Each interaction revealed another layer of the Foundation's impact and helped her understand the true scope of what she was inheriting. Maria Santos, a social worker from Manchester, shared how the Foundation's emergency fund had saved her program when government cuts threatened to close their residential facility for teenagers aging out of foster care. Your Majesty, Maria said, addressing Catherine with the title she would officially hold once William became king, the Queen didn't just send money. She sent hope. When our young people heard that the Queen herself had approved their funding, it changed how they saw themselves. Suddenly, they weren't just forgotten kids. They were important enough for the Queen to care about. This theme repeated throughout the afternoon. Dr. James Mitchell, a pediatric surgeon, described how Foundation grants had allowed him to perform experimental procedures that mainstream funding wouldn't cover. We saved dozens of children who wouldn't have had any other options, he explained to Catherine. But more than that, those successful treatments eventually became standard procedures that now help children worldwide. The Queen's willingness to take risks on unproven treatments has literally changed medical practice. Catherine was particularly moved by her conversation with Thomas Wright, now 43 and a successful architect, who had been in the Foundation's care as a severely neglected child in the 1980s. I was 6 years old when I was removed from my birth family, he told her quietly, away from the larger group. Angry, traumatized, convinced that no adult could be trusted. The Queen visited our children's home when I was 8, and I actually tried to hide from her because I thought she was just another adult who would make promises and then disappear. Thomas's story took an unexpected turn. But she found me anyway, crouched behind a bookshelf in the library. Instead of making me come out or calling for help, she just sat down on the floor next to the bookshelf and started reading aloud from one of the books. For 20 minutes, she read to me through the gaps between the books, never asking me to show my face or come out. When she finished the story, she left the book there and whispered that she hoped I'd enjoy the rest of it. That book was about a little boy who felt lost and scared but eventually found his way home. Thomas continued, his voice growing emotional. I must have read it 100 times over the next few years. Every time I felt hopeless, I'd remember that the Queen had chosen that specific story for me, and somehow it felt like a promise that things could get better. Today, I have a successful career, a loving wife, and 2 children of my own. That moment behind the bookshelf changed the entire trajectory of my life. Hearing these stories helped Catherine understand that her new role wasn't just about managing funds and attending events. It was about understanding the profound impact that royal attention and support could have on vulnerable lives. The Queen's presence, her personal interest, and her genuine care had often been as healing as the financial assistance itself. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine noticed the Queen growing visibly tired, but the elderly monarch refused all suggestions to rest or cut the reception short. These people came to honor our work together, she insisted to her personal aide. The least I can do is honor them in return by giving them my full attention for as long as they need it. The most challenging conversation of the day came when Catherine spoke with Rebecca Palmer, whose teenage son had died 3 years earlier despite receiving foundation support for experimental cancer treatment. Catherine had been briefed about Rebecca's attendance and had worried about how to handle such a delicate situation. I wanted to be here today, Rebecca explained, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind her words. Because I needed you to understand something important. When Jamie was diagnosed, we were told he had maybe 6 months to live. The foundation's support gave him 2 extra years, 2 years of birthdays, Christmases, and memories that our family will treasure forever. Rebecca continued, but more than that, the fact that the Queen personally approved Jamie's treatment funding made him feel special during the hardest time of his life. He used to tell people that the Queen was his partner in fighting the disease. When he died, he wasn't bitter or afraid. He was grateful for the extra time he'd been given and proud that he'd been brave enough to try the experimental treatment that might help other children in the future. This conversation crystallized something important for Catherine. She realized that success in this role wouldn't always be measured by lives saved or diseases cured. Sometimes it would be measured by dignity preserved, hope maintained, and love expressed during impossible circumstances. The Foundation's mission wasn't just about changing outcomes. It was about ensuring that every child felt valued and supported regardless of their prognosis. As the reception wound down, there was one final unplanned moment that would become legendary among those present. The Queen was saying her goodbyes, moving slowly through the room with her walking stick, when she paused in front of a wall display showing photographs from 7 decades of foundation work. The images chronicled her journey from a young monarch visiting her first children's hospital to the elderly woman she was today, surrounded by generations of children, families, and medical professionals who had been part of her mission. Catherine joined her in front of the display, and for several minutes they stood together in comfortable silence, both reflecting on the magnitude of what had been accomplished and what lay ahead. Finally, the Queen spoke, her voice so quiet that only Catherine could hear. "Do you see that photograph from 1952? She asked, pointing to a black and white image of herself as a young woman, sitting on a hospital bed next to a little boy with leg braces. That was my first official visit to a children's facility as Queen. I was terrified that I wouldn't know what to say, that I wouldn't be able to help in any meaningful way. But that little boy, Timothy, just wanted someone to listen to his stories about his pet rabbit. I realized that day that sometimes the most important thing we can offer is simply our presence and our genuine interest in their lives." The Queen turned to face Catherine directly, taking her hands in her own slightly trembling ones. "You already understand this, my dear. I've watched you with children over the years. and you have that same natural ability to meet them where they are, to make them feel heard and valued. Trust that instinct and you'll do beautifully. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Catherine realized that she was no longer just inheriting a royal patronage. She was being entrusted with a living legacy that had touched millions of lives and would continue to do so for generations to come. The weight of that responsibility was daunting, but the warmth and gratitude she had experienced from the families present today gave her confidence that she was ready for the challenge. The final image that stayed with her was of the Queen saying, "Goodbye to young Lily," bending down one more time to receive a drawing the little girl had made during the reception. It was a simple picture of two women in crowns standing next to a hospital, with the words, "Thank you for taking care of kids," written in uneven letters across the top. The Queen carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into her handbag, treating it with the same reverence she would show an official state document. In that gesture, Catherine saw the essence of what made the Queen's approach to this work so special. Every child mattered, every gesture of gratitude was precious, and every interaction was treated as a sacred trust. In the days following the handover ceremony, Catherine found herself processing the emotional weight of what had transpired. The transition had been beautiful and meaningful, but it also marked a significant shift in both her role and her relationship with the Queen. For the first time in her royal career, she was stepping into a position that was truly her own, not shared or shadowed by others, and the responsibility felt both liberating and overwhelming. The Queen, meanwhile, seemed to experience a mixture of relief and melancholy. Her private secretary noted that she had been spending more time in her personal study, going through decades of correspondence from children and families connected to the foundation. It was as if she was saying goodbye to each story, each memory, before fully releasing her hold on this cherished aspect of her life's work. Catherine made the decision to visit the Queen privately a week after the ceremony, bringing with her a leather-bound album that she had commissioned as a surprise gift. The album contained copies of hundreds of photographs from the Foundation's archives, carefully arranged chronologically to tell the story of the Queen's 7 decades of work. Each section was accompanied by brief notes that Catherine had written, highlighting specific children whose lives had been transformed or particular programs that had achieved remarkable success. When Catherine presented the album, the Queen's composed demeanor finally cracked. She spent over an hour carefully turning each page, pausing frequently to share memories that the photographs triggered. "Oh, this is little Sarah from Cardiff," she would say, pointing to a picture from the 1970s. "She had such a severe heart defect, but look at her smile in this photograph. The doctor said she might never walk normally, but she became a marathon runner. She still sends me Christmas cards, you know." As they went through the album together, Catherine began to understand the true emotional cost of the Queen's devotion to this cause. For every story of triumph and recovery, there were memories of children who hadn't survived, families who had suffered devastating losses, and moments when even the Foundation's resources hadn't been enough to change tragic outcomes. The Queen had carried all of these experiences, both joyful and heartbreaking, for 7 decades, and passing the responsibility to Catherine represented a kind of emotional release that was long overdue. "Catherine," the Queen said as they reached the final pages of the album, which contained recent photographs from various Foundation events, "I need you to understand something that I perhaps didn't explain clearly during our previous conversations. This work will change you in ways you cannot yet imagine. You will experience joy so profound that it will restore your faith in human resilience, but you will also encounter suffering that will test your emotional strength in unexpected ways." The Queen shared a story that she had never told anyone before about a 13-year-old girl named Anna, whom she had met in the early 1990s. Anna had been battling a rare genetic disorder, and despite receiving the best treatment that Foundation funding could provide, her condition had continued to deteriorate. "I visited Anna 6 times over the course of 2 years, the Queen recalled, her voice growing soft with memory. Each time she was physically weaker, but her spirit remained incredibly strong. She was determined to live to see her 14th birthday, so she could officially become a teenager. Anna died 3 days before her birthday," the Queen continued, pausing to collect herself. "Her mother called me personally to let me know, and she told me that Anna's last words were to thank me for making her feel special and important during her illness. For weeks afterward, I questioned whether I was strong enough to continue this work, whether I had the right to make promises to children that I might not be able to keep. Catherine listened intently, understanding that the Queen was sharing this painful memory to prepare her for the inevitable heartbreaks that would come with the role. "What changed your mind?" Catherine asked gently. "Anna's mother," the Queen replied without hesitation. "She sent me a letter a month after the funeral, along with Anna's diary. Anna had written that, even though she knew she probably wouldn't get better. Having the Queen care about her made her feel like her life had meaning and purpose. She wrote that she hoped her story would help other sick children know that they weren't alone, that even the Queen was thinking about them and wishing them well." This conversation marked a turning point in Catherine's understanding of her new role. She realized that success wouldn't always be measured in traditional terms of lives saved or diseases cured. Sometimes the most important contribution would be simply bearing witness to courage, providing comfort during suffering, and ensuring that every child felt valued and remembered, regardless of their outcome. The following week brought Catherine's first major decision as the Foundation's patron. An emergency funding request had come in from a hospital in Edinburgh for an experimental treatment that could potentially save a 4-year-old boy with a rare brain tumor. The treatment was unproven, expensive, and carried significant risks, but it represented the child's only chance for survival. The decision couldn't wait for committee meetings or lengthy reviews. It needed to be made immediately. Catherine found herself alone in her office late one evening, reviewing the medical reports and research data. The weight of the decision was enormous. If she approved the funding and the treatment failed, she would have spent precious resources that could have helped other children with more conventional needs. But if she didn't approve it, and the child died without any chance at survival, she would always wonder if she had made the right choice. She called the Queen, not to ask for advice on the specific decision, but to seek guidance on how to handle the emotional burden of such choices. The Queen's response was characteristically wise and practical. "Catherine, you will never have perfect information or absolute certainty in these situations. What you must rely on is your judgment, your compassion, and your willingness to take calculated risks when a child's life is at stake. The Foundation exists precisely for these moments when conventional funding won't act quickly enough or take chances on unproven treatments." "But how do you live with the uncertainty?" Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been keeping her awake at night. "You live with it by remembering that doing nothing is also a choice," the Queen replied gently. "If you have the resources, and the medical team believes there's a reasonable chance of success, then the question isn't whether you might be wrong. It's whether you can live with not trying at all." Catherine approved the funding that night, and 3 months later received a video call from little James in Edinburgh, showing off his new toy dinosaur collection and chattering excitedly about starting nursery school. The experimental treatment had worked, and he was in complete remission. But Catherine knew that not every decision would have such a happy ending, and she was beginning to understand the emotional complexity that would define her tenure as patron. The Queen's guidance. During this first major decision revealed the depth of wisdom she had accumulated over decades of similar choices. She had developed not just practical systems for evaluating requests, but emotional strategies for coping with the weight of responsibility. "You must celebrate every victory fully," she advised Catherine, "but you must also forgive yourself completely for the outcomes you cannot control. The children and families we serve need us to be emotionally present and engaged, not paralyzed by fear of making mistakes." As autumn arrived, Catherine began implementing some of her own ideas for expanding the Foundation's reach. She had noticed, during her visits, that many families struggled not just with their children's medical needs, but with the practical challenges of navigating complex healthcare systems, managing financial pressures, and maintaining family stability during extended treatment periods. Working with the Foundation's board, she proposed a new program that would provide family liaisons, trained support workers who would guide families through every aspect of their journey. The Queen was delighted by Catherine's innovation, seeing it as evidence that the foundation would continue to evolve and improve under her leadership. "I've always focused primarily on the medical and financial aspects," the Queen admitted during one of their regular update meetings. "But your idea addresses the whole family's needs, not just the child's. It shows a kind of holistic thinking that could revolutionize how we approach child welfare." Catherine's first few months as patron were marked by a series of visits to foundation-supported facilities across the United Kingdom. Unlike her previous royal engagements, these visits felt different, more personal, more consequential. She wasn't just there to smile and wave. She was there as the person responsible for these programs' continued existence and growth. The children and families she met looked to her not just as a royal figure, but as their advocate and protector. During a visit to a specialized facility for children with autism in Glasgow, Catherine met 9-year-old Oliver, who had initially been too overwhelmed by social interaction to participate in the Foundation's programs. His mother, Janet, explained how the facility's patient approach and specialized therapies had gradually helped Oliver build confidence and communication skills. 2 years ago, he couldn't make eye contact with strangers, Janet shared. Today, he specifically asked if he could show the princess his art project. Oliver's presentation of his artwork to Catherine became one of those magical moments that reminded her why this work mattered so deeply. He had created a series of paintings depicting different emotions, each one more vivid and expressive than the last. As he explained each piece, his enthusiasm grew, and Catherine found herself genuinely moved by his artistic talent and his obvious pride in his accomplishment. "This one is called Happy," Oliver said, showing Catherine a bright yellow painting filled with swirling patterns and dancing figures. "I painted it after I made my first friend here. Before, I didn't know how to show people when I was happy, but now I can paint it." The simplicity and honesty of his explanation touched Catherine deeply, reminding her that the Foundation's work often involved helping children find their own unique ways of connecting with the world around them. Catherine's growing confidence in her new role was evident to everyone around her. William noticed how she had begun speaking about the Foundation's work with increasing passion and expertise. Her children overheard phone calls where she discussed funding decisions with medical experts and program coordinators, using terminology that demonstrated her deep engagement with the work. Even her personal staff observed how she had started, carrying a small notebook where she jotted down ideas for program improvements or questions to research further. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Catherine had always been known for her warmth and empathy, but her work with the Foundation was bringing out new depths of these qualities. She found herself thinking differently about her own children's privileges and opportunities, more aware of the vast inequalities that existed even within their own country. This awareness led to conversations at home about gratitude, responsibility, and the importance of using their advantages to help others. One evening, as Catherine was reviewing grant applications in her study, Princess Charlotte wandered in with a question about her homework. She was learning about different types of families in school and wanted to know why some children didn't live with their parents. Instead of giving a simple answer, Catherine found herself explaining the foster care system, the challenges faced by children with serious illnesses, and the ways that organizations like the Foundation tried to help. "Mummy?" Charlotte asked, with the directness that children possess. "Is that why you have so many pictures of children who aren't us on your desk now?" Catherine looked around her study and realized that Charlotte was right. Her workspace had gradually filled with photographs from Foundation events, drawings from young patients, and thank you letters from families. Without consciously deciding to do so, she had surrounded herself with reminders of the children whose lives were now partly in her care. "Yes, darling," Catherine replied, pulling Charlotte onto her lap. "Just like how I love you and George and Louis more than anything in the world, these children's families love them just as much. Sometimes they need extra help to take care of them, and that's what my new job is about, making sure those children get the help they need." Charlotte studied one of the photographs on Catherine's desk, a picture of Catherine with a group of children at a cancer treatment center. "They look happy," she observed. "Even though they're sick, they look happy." Her innocent observation captured something profound about the foundation's impact that Catherine was only beginning to fully appreciate. The work wasn't just about treating illnesses or solving problems. It was about preserving childhood joy and wonder even in the most difficult circumstances. 6 months after the handover ceremony, Catherine faced her most challenging moment yet as patron of the foundation. A tragic fire at a children's residential facility in Wales had left 12 young residents without a home, and emergency funding was desperately needed to secure temporary accommodation and provide trauma counseling. The local authorities were overwhelmed, and the children, already vulnerable due to their circumstances, were facing additional displacement and uncertainty. Catherine's response to this crisis would define her approach to leadership in ways that surprised even herself. Instead of simply authorizing emergency funds from her London office, she made the decision to travel to Wales immediately, bringing with her not just financial resources but her personal attention and support. William initially worried about the emotional toll such a visit might take on his wife, but Catherine was resolute. "The Queen taught me that being patron means being present," she explained to William as she prepared for the unexpected journey. "These children have just experienced one of the most terrifying events of their lives. They need to know that someone cares enough to show up, not just send money." Her determination reminded William of his grandmother's approach, never sending others to do what she could do herself when children were involved. The scene that greeted Catherine in Wales was heartbreaking, but also inspiring. The local community had rallied around the displaced children, with families offering spare rooms, schools providing temporary classroom space, and local businesses donating clothes, toys, and necessities. The children themselves, ranging in age from 6 to 16, showed remarkable resilience despite their trauma, supporting each other and helping younger ones cope with their fears. Catherine spent 3 days in Wales, working directly with social workers, counselors, and community leaders to develop both immediate and long-term solutions. She visited each child individually, listening to their concerns and fears and helping them understand that they were safe and that people cared about their well-being. Her approach was gentle but practical. She acknowledged their trauma without dwelling on it and focused on helping them envision a positive future. One of the most powerful moments came when she met with 15-year-old Marcus, who had been in residential care for most of his life and had witnessed the fire start in the facility's kitchen. He was struggling with guilt, believing that he should have been able to prevent the disaster or warn others more quickly. Catherine spent over an hour with Marcus, helping him understand that he was not responsible for the accident and that his quick thinking and alerting other residents had actually prevented the situation from being much worse. "You saved lives that night," Catherine told him with conviction. "The fire investigators confirmed that your actions gave everyone crucial extra minutes to evacuate safely. Instead of focusing on what you think you should have done differently, focus on what you actually did. You were brave, you thought of others before yourself, and you helped keep everyone safe." Her words, delivered with genuine sincerity, began to ease the burden of guilt that Marcus had been carrying. During her time in Wales, Catherine also met with Sarah Matthews, the facility's director, who had been devastated by the loss of the building that had been her life's work. Sarah had dedicated 25 years to creating a warm, stable environment for children who had experienced trauma, abuse, or neglect, and watching her facility burn had felt like losing a piece of herself. Catherine's response to Sarah's grief demonstrated the emotional intelligence that had made her the Queen's choice for this role. "Sarah, buildings can be replaced," Catherine said, sitting with the director in a quiet corner of the temporary accommodation center. "What you've built here goes far beyond physical walls. I've spent 3 days watching these children, and what I see is a group of young people who trust each other, who support each other, and who know how to show love even in the midst of crisis. That's not something that happened by accident. That's the culture you created, and it survived the fire intact." Catherine's words proved prophetic. Over the following weeks, as plans developed for rebuilding the facility, it became clear that the children's strong relationships with each other and with their caregivers had indeed survived the trauma. They worked together to design aspects of their new home, supported each other through counseling sessions, and even organized a fundraising event to help other children's facilities improve their fire safety measures. The incident in Wales marked a turning point in public perception of Catherine's role as foundation patron. Media coverage focused not on her fashion choices or royal protocol, but on her hands-on approach to crisis management and her obvious emotional investment in the children's welfare. More importantly, it established her credibility within the child welfare community, showing that she was willing to go beyond traditional royal duties when children's lives were at stake. The Queen followed Catherine's handling of the Wales crisis closely, receiving daily updates from her private secretary. What impressed her most wasn't just Catherine's immediate response, but her follow-up commitment. Catherine had arranged for ongoing foundation support for the affected children, including funding for extended counseling services and educational assistance to help them cope with any disruptions to their schooling. She had also initiated a comprehensive review of fire safety measures at all foundation-supported facilities across the Commonwealth. 2 weeks after returning from Wales, Catherine received a handwritten letter that would become one of her most treasured possessions. It was from the Queen, written in her familiar, careful script on her personal stationery. The letter was brief but profound in its emotional impact. "My dearest Catherine," it read, "I have spent the past weeks watching you step into your role as patron, and I want you to know how proud I am of the woman and leader you have become. Your response to the crisis in Wales showed not just competence, but the kind of intuitive understanding of what these children need that cannot be taught or learned from books. You listened with your heart, acted with courage, and followed through with commitment. These are the qualities that will make you not just a successful patron, but a transformative one." The letter continued, "I am writing to tell you something that I have never said to anyone else who has taken on one of my former patronages. I am completely at peace with this transition. I know that the foundation is not just in capable hands, but in hands that will guide it to heights I never imagined possible. You have my complete confidence and my boundless gratitude for accepting this responsibility." Reading this letter, Catherine finally felt the full weight of the Queen's trust settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a privilege. She understood now that the handover ceremony had been more than just a formal transition of duties. It had been the Queen's way of saying that she could finally rest easy about this most precious aspect of her legacy, knowing that it would continue to flourish and grow under Catherine's care. The final scene of this chapter in both women's lives came a month later, during a small dinner party at Windsor Castle. The Queen had invited Catherine and William for what she described as a casual family meal, but Catherine suspected it was really the Queen's way of celebrating her successful first months as patron. As they sat in the Queen's private dining room, sharing stories and laughing together, Catherine realized that their relationship had evolved into something deeper than protocol or duty. It had become a genuine friendship built on shared values and mutual respect. As the evening wound down, the Queen made one final gesture that encapsulated the grace and wisdom she had shown throughout the transition. She presented Catherine with a simple silver pendant, worn smooth by decades of handling. "This was given to me by the first child I ever met as Queen," she explained. "He was 5 years old, terminally ill, and he gave it to me because he said, 'Queens should have special jewelry.' I've carried it with me to every foundation event for 70 years. Now I want you to have it, not as a reminder of me, but as a reminder of him and of all the children who will look to you for hope and healing." The pendant, with its simple engraving of a child's handprint, became Catherine's most precious possession, a tangible link to the legacy she had inherited and a daily reminder of the trust that had been placed in her hands. As she and William drove home that evening, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion and beginning intertwined. The Queen had given her not just a role, but a purpose that would define the rest of her life, and she was ready to honor that gift with everything she had.